Greg, let's see if we can bring you in.
Coming through.
Trying to bring you in right now.
Okay.
Hello.
There we go. Can you
Hello,
hear me?
can you hear me? You can hear me? Oh.
Yep.
I can hear you, but I can't see you. Let's see if we can get your picture back. There we are.
There we go.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you all doing?
We're doing great. Unfortunately, you can't be with us right here, but you're on the big screen. Everybody's looking at you, eager to hear what you have to say. There we are. Can you see that? Did you see that?
Awesome. I can see you. I've got you loud and clear.
Okay, listen, take it away. I'll leave it up to you. 30 minutes, all yours, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a wonderful honor and a privilege to be at this conference. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship and innovation at the Kelly School of Business. And one of my wonderful things that I do each year is visit Algebra University College in Zagreb, Croatia. So I've got this fond and genuine connection with Croatia, and I love working with the students there, with the people there, and overall it's always an awesome experience. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about this sort of critical theme of our times. There's not an organization that I ever interact with that doesn't say, oh, we don't need to innovate any more than we're currently innovating, or innovation's not a priority for us. Almost every organization that across the globe today is saying, well, if we want to stay relevant and competitive in our industry, then we need to innovate. In addition, and probably even more importantly for each one of you, that filters down to how you are measured as a leader. Are you fostering, nurturing, and setting up your company to be successful at this thing we call innovation? So, assuming that is partly the case for all of you in the audience, let's start off by just talking a little bit about what is this thing we call innovation. I'm going to break it down into three components. The first is that in order to innovate, you need to be doing things that are novel, that are new, that are different to what has been done before and different to what your competitors are doing. And so the one dimension of innovation is novelty. The second dimension is that if you're going to be doing things that are novel, they better at the same time be useful to your end users, useful to your broader set of stakeholders, maybe useful to your internal employees if you're innovating on internal processes. But in some sense, you're not just creating new things for the sake of creating new things. You're creating new things such that they can be genuinely useful. Now, if all they are is novel and useful, that's nice. It's going to improve things, but it's not going to ultimately impact the performance of the company unless you're able to generate value out of those things. So as we talk about innovation, we're talking about doing something that is different and useful, and then ultimately generating value from that thing. So if we want to do this, what are our options? Well, if you stand back and think about it logically, at the core, we need to be generating more novel, useful, and valuable ideas from within the organization. So as a leader, I need to think about how can I generate more novel, useful, and valuable ideas from within the organization and then execute on those ideas. And if we take the first part of all of that, we can think about the generation of novel, useful, and valuable ideas as being a combination of idea quantity, because the more ideas we develop, the more likely we are to uncover really interesting and useful ideas, and idea quality, which is probably even more important, because if all we're generating is lots of poor ideas, we're not going to get very much. And so what happens within organizations is we see this sort of curve where we generate a lot of ideas. Some of them are average, some of them are below average, but the ones we're really interested in are the ones that are above a threshold of quality that we can think about implementing, testing, trying out, and taking forward within the organization. So the challenge for a leader is to ask the question, how do I, as a leader, generate more novel, useful, and valuable ideas that sit above that threshold of quality? And one way of doing that is to just generate more ideas across the board. So encourage more people to be generating ideas, engage in more R&D funding, go out and work with more broader communities and try and get more ideas and so on. And so you push up the idea quantity, because that will invariably push up the idea, at least some of the idea quality. The second option is to increase idea diversity. You try and push out the source and the ways you're going about generating ideas, such that you're getting more diverse ideas, such that you get more above this particular threshold. And then the third is to just try and generally increase the average quality of ideas that you're generating, such that you move that curve upwards. Now, all three of those are nice. They're theoretical. They're interesting to talk about. The challenge is, how do you do this on a practical setting? How do you do this in a really, really practical way? Well, I think that the time now is more opportune and more interesting than ever before in terms of the options that we've got for innovating in organizations. And that's driven really by two major shifts in work practices over the past 50 years that have opened up organizations to the opportunities that they've got to innovate, the opportunities that they've got to generate more idea volume, diversity, and quality. And so I'm just going to mention these two shifts and then talk about what do they mean for our innovation strategy going forward. So the first shift is that in this day and age, and over the last 50 years, we've seen a continual increase in worker autonomy. It used to be that workers worked in very constrained processes according to very well-defined practices that were specified by the organization, and they would come in, they would clock in, they would clock out, and do exactly what the organization wanted within a period of time. And the increase in knowledge work, in digitization, in opportunities to operate across boundaries and technological advancements have meant that over the last 50 years, we've systematically increased the amount of autonomy that workers have at their disposal. And they're working more now as isolated little islands unto themselves than they've ever done before. Obviously, they need to be plugged into the organization, but each worker is almost like a little entity unto themselves, with technology at their disposal, with the opportunity to travel, with the opportunity to do different things. So we've got a substantial increase in worker autonomy, more so than we've ever had in the past. The second big shift is that communication is easier now than it's ever been before. And that is both a blessing and a curse, because we've got so many different communication channels and so many different ways of communicating internally within an organization and externally out to different stakeholders that sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. But these two shifts, worker autonomy and communication flows, have substantially increased the strategic options that we've got at our disposal in order to be able to innovate. And so I'm going to explain this in the context of a 2x2 matrix. If we take the traditional orientation towards innovation, if we go back to Bell Labs and to HP and to some of the organizations that were sort of early on in this phase of thinking about organizations as opportunities for innovation, their primary strategy for innovation was often within a pretty formalized, rigorous, hierarchical process where you would set up a department for innovation or an R&D department, and it would be inside the organization, controlled by the organization. So this traditional notion of an R&D department or an innovation department or a skunk works within the organization to innovate on ideas that the organization said were important, or that the leaders of that organization said were important. And that's where we've come from as larger organizations trying to innovate. Set aside some money, some resources, some time, and set up this department to do it. And I call that the specialist mode of innovation. Now, these two forces, these two trends that we've seen in the workplace have shifted the options that we've got beyond just this innovation department into alternative options that we can think about as modes of innovating, as strategic modes of innovating within an organization. So if we think about the fact that workers now are more autonomous than they've ever been before, they've got more latitude to make decisions, to manage their time, to figure out what's important and not important as they work. So we land up with this, these opportunities to become less formal about how we innovate, and less formal in terms of what we dictate people should be proposing as ideas or working on as ideas in order to innovate. And we can increase the quality and the quantity of ideas by embracing more self-selecting, self-arranging, informal modes of innovation. And one of those is to try and encourage people internally to be more entrepreneurial, to be more innovative on a day-to-day basis. And I call that the venture mode of innovating. And the second is the second shift is that because communication flows have increased so substantially, and we've got access to the internet and access to different channels to communicate with diverse stakeholders, we no longer only need to innovate from within the organization or generate ideas from within the organization. We can now think about going much broader, and we can think about working with organizations or working with teams of people outside of the organization, and both formally in terms of a network mode of innovation, and my icon has gone a little bit out there, and in terms of a community mode of innovation. Now, the question for you is, you're thinking, what's he really talking about? What are these different modes of innovation? What do each of them entail? And what might I as a leader do if I'm trying to embrace any one of them? And so that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about, is if we start to say, well, we used to have this sort of one mode or drive or structure for innovating in an organization. And because of increased worker autonomy and communication flows, we've now got 4 very viable, very valuable, and potentially very interesting ways of structuring an organization in order to innovate. Let's understand those 4 a little more and start to think about how you as a leader may consider utilizing or implementing them as you go forward. So I'm going to start off by talking about what I see as the most traditional mode of innovation, which is that specialist mode, that mode in which you're in a formal organizational hierarchy and you're operating internally within the organization. The source of ideas comes from the internal organization, and the structure is formal. So it's the specialist mode. It sits in that top left corner of our matrix over here. And really, there's 3 things you want to focus on if you're thinking about or utilizing or trying to drive the specialist mode in your organization. The first is, have you got the right goals in place? Are you setting appropriate, clear, and understandable innovation goals? If you're not doing that, then people are going to be very scattered and very uncertain about what they should be doing in this innovation department or sector of the organization. The second is, have you set milestones in place that work towards achieving those goals, specific smaller goals or more deliberate goals that allow you to achieve the overarching bigger goal that you're trying to achieve? And the third is, have you got monitoring and evaluation processes that ensure that you're meeting those milestones? So there's a few organizations, even modern day organizations, that still use this mode of innovation primarily and very effectively. The one of them is SpaceX. SpaceX sending large rockets into space. Elon Musk and his executives are largely setting the goals for those organizations, setting the milestones for those goals, evaluating according to those goals, and hiring people internally to deliver on them more so than anything else that they're trying to do in terms of innovating. The other organization that's really interesting, very different industry and different space, is Pixar. Pixar have these very structured story trusts within the organization. They set very definitive release dates for new movies and have got a very structured process for working out what are going to be the new movies, when are they going to be released, and what's the storyline going to be, and then monitoring throughout the development process of each animated film that they create, that film is meeting certain deadlines. So those are two organizations, modern day successful organizations that are using the specialist mode pretty effectively. What are you trying to do? What's the picture for a specialist mode of innovation? Well, you start on the left-hand side of the slide as you look at it with identifying what's the core problem or opportunity that the organization's trying to address. And you start with that focal issue. And then you work internally to look for a diverse array of solutions. You have some selection criteria for selecting, well, what's the right way of solving that focal problem or issue? You then narrow it down to fewer possible solutions, and you select and ultimately select the one you're going to pursue, and then you develop that internally according to a set of milestones. So this diamond framework of working from problem to array of solutions to focal solutions to development of the focal solutions is really the mental model or mental map that we use in the specialist mode. So you identify the core problem, look mostly internally for options to address that core problem, issue, or opportunity, evaluate those options and home in on a specific choice, and then develop a core concept and use that concept or take it to market in the organization. And so it's all happening within the organizational boundaries. So the specialist mode ultimately entails setting goals for innovation and product development, and then hiring highly qualified individuals to achieve those goals. So hiring and the right people in the organization is important. It allows for a high level of control over the innovation process. And the trade-off is that you really get a fairly limited number and diversity of ideas. It locks the organization into a particular innovation trajectory, but can often be combined with other modes that I'm going to talk about in a moment in order to mitigate this challenge or this risk. And so finding and hiring talented employees and organizing them effectively is the key to being successful here. So here are a few questions you should ask yourself if you're going to embrace this mode. Do you have the right product development goals? Do you have monitoring and performance processes in place towards those goals? Do you hire highly skilled experts to work on those goals and those challenges? Do you use leading edge technologies and techniques in terms of developing future products and services? And do you utilize valuable internal resources to do what you're trying to do? And ultimately, are you protecting your innovations through some kind of IP or legal protection processes? So that's the first mode, the specialist mode. It's the top left corner. It's about being formal and internal in the organization. The next mode is we drop down and say, well, we could be a little less formal, a little bit more self-arranging, allow innovation to bubble up within the organization from below, allow employees to essentially become entrepreneurs in their own organization. And so what are the keys here? One of the keys is motivating, empowering, and bringing employees on board, giving them permission to offer up new ideas and bring new ideas to the table. Then having internal processes to evaluate those ideas as employees bring them to the table, and ultimately having leadership support for the notion that employees can be autonomous, can develop new ideas, and can be entrepreneurial within their own organizations. So two organizations that have really embraced this as their primary mode of innovation. One is 3M, who was sort of the first organization to do it, and Post-it notes were famously developed within the free time, the 20% of the time that 3M employees had to tinker and to work on their own projects. And they've continued with this practice for over 40 years of giving employees about a day a week to work on whatever project they want, such that they come up with new ideas, new concepts, and new ways of doing things that can drive innovation in the organization. And Google essentially copied 3M in doing that. And many of the innovations we see within Google were developed by employees as side projects within the organization. Gmail, Google Maps are two of the famous ones that were developed from within the organization as side projects developed by employees. And so what are you trying to do in this mode of innovation? Well, instead of seeing it as a diamond, you see it more as a funnel that starts with the exploration of many ideas from incentivized and motivated employees that are then evolved and developed over time. You give employees, you empower them with the ability to be able to evaluate their own ideas and develop them to the point where they can be evaluated by senior executives in the organization. And ultimately, those senior executives then choose what to take to market and develop a go-to-market approach, often utilizing the employees that have brought those ideas to market to take them to market. So you need to execute on those things. So we got those 4 E's: explore, evolve, evaluate, and execute in order to drive this forward. So what are some of the lessons here? Well, allowing individuals to work as individuals or as small teams within the organization, essentially utilizing things like lean startup practices and processes from outside startups that can be used inside the organization to help develop ideas, engaging employees that don't traditionally sit in R&D and sometimes customer-facing employees, and telling them they're allowed to and should innovate. And ultimately, developing an organizational culture that encourages and embraces new ideas. Culture is critical here. If people don't feel they can offer ideas, don't feel they can fail, don't feel they can explore, then this mode of innovation will ultimately fail. It necessitates strong leadership buy-in to make it work. If leaders don't believe that employees can and will generate ideas, then they won't. And ultimately, it depends on the intrinsic motivation of employees. So tapping into those intrinsic motivations, those things that make them excited and that they care about. And ultimately, you need a venturing process, that funnel that I showed you, in place to facilitate taking things from idea to implementation in order to bring them to fruition. So what are some of the questions you want to ask yourself here? Do we encourage employees to develop their own opportunities? Do we allow small teams to form around ideas? Do we provide investment for outside R&D, for ventures outside of R&D? Do we allow a percentage of people's time to go towards working on their own projects? Do we have a defined method for providing resources, both education and mentoring, to new venture teams? Do we have a space for teams to work? And are there incentives provided to employees to contribute ideas to the organization? And ultimately, are we able to measure the quality of ideas that go through this funnel within the organization? So then the third mode, which unfortunately my icon's not showing there, but it's essentially showing a network, is shifting now across from being specialist and internal to going outside, but still engaging in formal hierarchical relationships. In other words, we're forming relationships typically with other organizations. Maybe it's universities, maybe it's other companies, maybe it's other experts in the field that sit outside the organization, and we're entering into contractual relationships with them formally to do what we're intending to do. And the critical things here are selecting the best and the right partners to be able to do this, so partner selection, then partner negotiation, working with those partners so that both parties, the other organization, whether it's a university or an expert or another company, we're both incentivized to work on an innovation project in a multi-party alliance or in a strategic sort of joint venture, incentivized to work on it in a dedicated way and create value out of it. And then third, partner management over time. So let's have a look at, and then ultimately, one of the things we often talk about is how do you then dissolve the partnership once you've achieved certain goals? And so some of the organizations that have embraced this successfully, and maybe at times a little bit more contentiously or less successfully, one of the major organizations to really shift its whole focus towards this as a mode to innovate was Boeing, the airplane manufacturer. And they learned a lot of tough lessons along the way in terms of those things around partner management and partner negotiation in terms of getting this right. Ultimately, they developed the 787 Dreamliner through a process of networked partnerships, and each of those partners brought some piece of innovation to the table that they built into the aircraft. However, it was incredibly difficult to get this right, and they took 3, 4, 5 years just to figure out how to manage this complex array of partnerships. And so this is their project management center that you see on the right there. And then on the left is an exhibit of the 787 Dreamliner plane, and it just shows where all the different parts of the plane have been manufactured by partners in different parts of the world, from things like the wingtips being manufactured in Korea, the forward fuselage being manufactured in Japan, the center wing box being manufactured in Fiji, and certain parts being manufactured in Italy and Sweden and so on. And so these partners from all over the world came together to help them and to drive new innovation in each of those pieces of the aircraft. The second organization that's done this very extensively is Procter & Gamble, and they developed a strategy called Connect and Develop. And they would form partnerships around consumer products or consumer product solutions with people and organizations and universities from all over the world to bring new innovations to their consumer products. And so what does this mode of innovation look like? Well, we can once again embrace that notion of the diamond, starting with a core problem or opportunity or issue. But this time, the inputs into that diamond come from the outside of the organization, not only from the inside. And so you identify a core problem or issue, then you work with others externally to address that core problem, issue, or opportunity. So all those outside circles or outside partners bringing ideas and insights to the table. Then you evaluate those options and narrow them down so that you decide what we're actually going to work on and take to market. And then you develop a core concept around the market opportunity. And so it starts with a focal issue. You find solutions from others and then evaluate them and then develop solutions with partners. And so one of the big things to think about here is, what are my options for different types of partnerships that I might enter into? Because really partnerships are the source of innovation in this context. So you might think about alliances, joint ventures where you form a new entity and both join the new entity, project contracts, just long contracts that list out what each partner is going to do, investing in a particular partner, and sometimes bigger organizations invest in startups to be able to do this. And then targeted procurement, getting supply from a particular partner when they can offer something that's really interesting. So those are all the options that you've got at your disposal in order to form good partnerships. So what are some of the lessons around the network mode of innovation? Well, number one, it's about building an ecosystem of partnerships that facilitate innovation. It's often a natural progression from the specialist mode. You start to realize there's lots of opportunities outside of the organization that we can take advantage of. The selection of the right network partners is absolutely critical. If you choose the wrong partners, you're dead in the water. It can spread and the network can spread and enhance where innovation comes from, but this needs to be managed prudently. You don't just want to partner with everybody. And we see a lot of particularly fast-growing technological organizations just trying to partner with everyone and not really having a strategic plan behind their partnerships. And new ventures and universities can serve as important network partners with great opportunities there. But ultimately, you need to discuss and debate intellectual property, number one, and incentives between partners, number two, as two key things that need to be managed across those partner relationships. So what are some questions to ask here? Well, what do you consider to be your core competency as an organization? Keep that in-house and then work with others around other things you might do. Who are your current vendors and partners, and could you do more with them? Are there interesting startups or university researchers you might partner with? And do you co-develop or share IP with vendors? Because that can always be an opportunity. And then the final mode I'm going to talk about is the bottom right-hand corner. It's what we call the community mode. So we've spoken about specialist, internal and formal. We've spoken about venture, internal and informal. We've spoken about network, external and formal. And now we're going to speak about community, which is external and informal. And that's essentially working with communities and crowds across the globe to solve your problems, to generate new ideas, to generate more innovations. So what's critical when you start to branch out into certain crowds and communities, very often online, is forging as an organization a relationship with that community such that you can depend on them, such that they can trust you and they can begin to offer ideas and input into solving your problems. Then having a way of capturing inputs from the community and integrating those into your innovation processes. So there's a few organizations that do this really, really well. Local Motors is an automobile manufacturer in the US that creates 3D printed cars in very interesting ways. And one of the primary things they do is capture inputs and ideas from a community of automotive enthusiasts. And this thing here is the Ollie, which is essentially a self-driving people transporter that gets used in theme parks and in city centers, and was the source of this innovation was a guy in Berlin who came up with the idea of how to create this thing through an innovation competition that Local Motors ran. And they do this consistently and generate innovations out of it. A failed case of this was the consumer products company called Quirky, and they would run innovation competitions around new consumer products. And one of the things they didn't manage was their portfolio of products, such that it became so unwieldy that they actually struggled to go forward. They got amazing amounts of success early on, but then just almost expanded that success too broadly. And then Lego have become very, very good at doing this, working with users, working with communities, working with kids and adults who care about Lego to develop new Lego products, new Lego solutions. And so you've got to think about what type of communities are you going to tap into? Are they customers or user communities? Are they research communities that are going to be most useful? Are they maker communities? Are they communities around particular geographies? And most of them in this day and age tend to collect and collaborate online. And so you need to figure out how do you get into those online communities. And so the picture or the structure here is that you've got at the one end all of these community people who are going to contribute your first set of ideas, and then you need a funnel for taking those ideas to market. So you connect with the community, you collect their contributions, their inputs, their market insights, you evaluate those, and then you develop new ideas around them. So what do you need? You need motivated, engaged community members, you need evaluation criteria, and you need a product development process to take the best ideas forward. So what are some of the lessons here? Well, communities can serve as a low-cost source of opportunities and solutions. However, the quality of inputs that you get from this broad community can often vary, and you need a way of sorting through that. So finding and tapping into the right community or communities can be challenging, but if you get that right, it's a great source of new ideas. And communities of experts can be useful to work on issues of great difficulty. So Netflix, for instance, completely revised their algorithm by tapping into communities of experts in a competitive format to come up with a better algorithm for what they were doing. You need incentives and rewards. They can be extrinsic and or intrinsic rewards to drive community participation and engagement. But if you let those get too big and too unwieldy, they can often sometimes push the community in a weird direction. And then the entire innovation process can become a little bit unwieldy and problematic unless it's carefully managed. So your role as a leader is to manage it. And these questions can help you do that. So firstly, do you have a presence in social media and user forums? Do you engage users and customers in various different forums where they collect? Do you ask users and customers for new ideas for product and service feedback that might lead to new ideas? Are your social media and community development efforts integrated with marketing and innovation? So those three areas need to be talking to each other: innovation, marketing, and community engagement or social media engagement all need to be working together. Do you offer contests and prizes to your community? And have you considered engaging with outside open innovation firms such as Innocentive that will help you run those competitions or run those contests? So ultimately, we land up with these 4 different modes of innovation. And your goal as a leader is to decide which one or which combination of these really works for us as an organization, and that's your strategic choice. We're going to be specialist, we're going to be network, we're going to be venture, or we're going to be community. And then to structure your innovation processes in terms of the pictures and ideas that I've shared with you to support that particular mode. And if you do that, you can all of a sudden become much more strategic, much more targeted, and hopefully generate much more value through what you're trying to do as an innovator. So I hope that structure, that the 2x2 matrix and thinking through it has been helpful to you and will help you as you go forward in terms of being an innovation leader in your organization. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, hands together for Greg Fisher. Thanks, Greg. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is where we say goodbye. Goodbye, farewell. Thank you so much. Right, we move on now to our next session, which is